Nia Carter had just finished mopping the marble floor when the CEO's wife handed her a torn paycheck. Half her wage, no explanation. "You people should be grateful," she said, sipping champagne. Nia didn't flinch. She pulled out her phone and played a recording that could ruin everything. In 30 seconds, the mansion's silence would turn to screams. But who else was on that tape, and why did they sound so familiar? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sun filtered through the 12-foot windows of the Whitmore estate like golden judgment. Every corner of the 9,000-square-foot Beverly Hills mansion gleamed with curated opulence, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, fresh-cut orchids imported weekly from Brazil, and a scent in the air that whispered money. In this fortress of engineered perfection lived one of America's most powerful tech tycoons, Bradley Whitmore, and just beneath the surface of his empire, hidden in the silence and routines of his staff, walked a woman who had quietly watched everything unfold for 5 years. Nia Carter stood in the kitchen, carefully aligning the silver handles on the espresso machine. Her movements were practiced, gentle rituals honed, not just from habit, but from years of knowing that silence and precision were the only shields she had in a world that rarely looked her in the eye. At 47, she wore her dignity like armor, pressed uniform, hair pinned tight, and a gaze that had learned not to flinch. She arrived at 5:30 a.m. every morning without fail, long before the Whitmores rose from their organic cotton sheets. She'd served tea to senators in this house, cleaned up after industry giants, witnessed betrayals behind frosted glass doors, and watched marriages crack through polite smiles. But today, something in the air felt brittle, like glass ready to shatter. From upstairs came the muffled vibration of a voice, urgent, angry, then the thundering of expensive shoes against a marble staircase. Bradley Whitmore descended like a man on fire, Bluetooth earpiece blinking against his jaw. His words sliced the air. "I said pull the contract immediately. No, I don't give a damn what the Berlin office says. If they can't hold the merger, I'll bury the whole damn division." He turned the corner into the kitchen, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. Nia didn't flinch. She simply stepped aside to allow him room. But in that split second his shoulder caught hers, and the espresso in his left hand slipped. The ceramic cup exploded on the floor, sending a splash of dark roast across the white cabinetry. Bradley froze. For a beat, the world stood still. Then he snapped. "Are you serious right now?" His voice thundered, louder than necessary. "You walked right into me." Nia instinctively stepped back, hands raised in silent apology. "I didn't No, don't even try it," he said, cutting her off. He yanked the Bluetooth out of his ear and pointed a shaking finger. "Every damn morning it's something. The napkins folded wrong, the coffee not hot enough, or you in the way." Across the foyer, Victoria Whitmore appeared, her silk robe cinched tight, face painted with calm concern. Behind her, their children, Leo and Maddie, stood halfway down the stairs, frozen. "You people just can't handle the basics," Bradley muttered. The words dropped like a lead weight in the room. It wasn't the volume. It was the venom, the way you people slipped from his tongue, casual and sharp like a switchblade. It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that. But this time, the silence around him felt different, charged. Victoria's lips parted, but she said nothing. Nia inhaled slowly. She bent down, not to pick up the cup, but to look Bradley in the eyes. Her voice, when it came, was even, calm, laced with something deeper. "I know your secret, Mr. Whitmore." The room cracked. Bradley blinked. "What?" I said. Nia rose to her full height, meeting his gaze. "I know your secret." Victoria's robe rustled as she took an involuntary step forward. The kids didn't move. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. Bradley's laugh came too quickly, too forced. "You're joking, right? What the hell are you talking about?" But Nia didn't blink. She didn't explain. She just held his stare with the unflinching calm of a woman who had already seen too much. Victoria's voice, usually smooth and composed, cracked slightly.
"Nia, what do you mean?"
But Nia said nothing more. She turned, walked past the shattered espresso on the floor, and calmly reached for a towel. Bradley stood frozen, pupils dilated, chest rising and falling. Inside him, panic bloomed. Because there were many secrets Bradley Whitmore had buried, and one of them had just resurfaced in the calm voice of a maid he'd never thought to fear. What secret does Nia know, and how deep does it go? The smell of scorched espresso still lingered in the air long after the confrontation. The kitchen had fallen eerily quiet. Nia finished wiping the marble counter, her movements slow, deliberate. Victoria had retreated upstairs without another word. The children disappeared silently into their rooms, and Bradley, he stormed into his home office, slamming the glass door hard enough for the chandelier above to tremble. But the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was pressure, waiting to explode. Nia could feel the shift in the air, the invisible eyes watching her more closely now. The mansion, once predictable in its daily rhythms, had started whispering back at her. She didn't look over her shoulder when Maria, the housekeeper, crept in and whispered, "What did you mean, you know his secret?" Her accent thickened with nerves. Nia turned slowly, her face calm but unreadable. "Not here," she said simply, then resumed wiping a spotless surface. But the damage had been done. Word spread quickly through the mansion like static across a frequency. The driver heard from the chef, who heard from the nanny, who overheard the gardener talking to Nia by the garage. By sundown, every employee in the Whitmore estate was abuzz with versions of the same question: what secret? But only 2 people had any real clue. And both of them were good at keeping quiet. 2 years earlier, Nia had just started working at the Whitmore estate. Back then, everything felt sterile but manageable. Bradley barely noticed her. Victoria was overly polite. The children were colder than the furniture, trained in the language of status from birth. She stayed quiet, as she always had, did her job, made herself small. But even in silence, Nia noticed things. Things others were too busy, or too afraid to see, like the late-night meetings in the study. Always past midnight. Always the same 2 white men in crisp non-branded suits, arriving in unmarked black sedans. They never spoke to the staff, never signed in. Nia once saw Bradley hand them a folder that was quickly burned in the outdoor fireplace. An hour later, or the shredded documents in the kitchen trash. Not the office shredder. Kitchen. Dozens of pages ground into thin ribbons and thrown beneath the sink, buried under avocado peels and coffee grounds. She didn't try to piece them together, but she noted the logo, Whitmore Impact Fund, the supposedly charitable arm of Bradley's tech empire. And then there were the phone calls. Quick, clipped, always in code. "He doesn't know yet. No, move it to Luxembourg. Tell him if he talks he's finished."
Nia never said a word. Until one day, while watering the orchids in the back courtyard, she stumbled upon Louis shirtless and sweating under the California sun, trimming the hedges.
"Someone's got to remind these plants they can't grow wherever they feel like," he joked. It became their ritual, little exchanges in the early hours or late evenings. And over time, trust bloomed in silence. One evening, Nia asked quietly, "Louise, do you ever hear strange things from the main house?" Louise paused. "You mean besides the kids crying when nobody's around? Or the CEO screaming about Geneva wire transfers at 3 a.m.? That was the first time Nia smiled in weeks. He continued, "I used to work maintenance over at Whitmore Global HQ. Did you know that?" She didn't. "Yeah. Before I was just the gardener. Got downsized right before the press conference announcing his new commitment to diversity." His tone dripped irony. It was Louise who first told her about the charity scam. How Whitmore's donations were going into shell accounts offshore. How local community centers listed under the foundation's name hadn't seen a dime in years. "You think he built this house with honest money?" Louise asked. "Nia, everything here's polished lies." But Nia knew. She had always known. She had lived long enough to know that money that loud had to be hiding something. And still she said nothing. Until the kitchen. Until the espresso. Until you people. Now, in the days after the kitchen explosion, the mansion operated under a strange kind of stillness. The staff no longer spoke openly in the hallways. Rooms were cleaned in nervous silence. Orders were followed quickly, not efficiently. Even the children avoided eye contact. Bradley hadn't spoken to Nia since, but the paranoia in his eyes grew by the hour. He had the house swept for listening devices, replaced the security system, fired the night butler with no explanation. To anyone watching, it was clear Bradley Whitmore was unraveling. Victoria, however, was not a woman who let things slip. On the 3rd day, she cornered Nia in the solarium. A pristine room with high ceilings, overflowing with sunlight and rare imported plants. It was Victoria's sanctuary, far from the tech world her husband ruled. She closed the door behind her. "I need to know," she said softly. What do you think you know? Nia didn't look up from the glass she was polishing. You should ask your husband. I'm asking you. Nia finally looked up. Her voice was calm, cold. Sometimes silence buys safety. Victoria blinked. But I'm done being safe. For a moment, something flickered behind Victoria's eyes. Guilt? Fear? Recognition? Before she could say more, a buzzer sounded from the front gate. The intercom crackled. It was Maria's voice. Mr. Whitmore, a package just arrived. No signature, no delivery slip. Who's it from? Bradley barked through the hallway. No return address, but it's for you. Bradley appeared at the top of the stairs in seconds, his face already pale. Bring it here, he ordered. Maria held it like it might explode. Plain brown wrapping, no markings except a single sticker. Private. Nia watched from the shadows, towel still in her hand. Bradley ripped the package open. Inside was a thick envelope, a USB drive, and a single photograph. As he pulled it out, the blood drained from his face. It was a photo of him on a yacht, shaking hands with a man the public believed had been dead for years. A man linked to an international fraud scandal in Geneva. Bradley's hand trembled. Nia turned away, silent. Inside the envelope was a second photo, and this time, it wasn't of Bradley at all. It was of Nia, smiling, standing next to Reggie Carter, her late husband, the civil rights lawyer who had died in an accident years ago. The moment the second photo slipped from Bradley's fingers, it was as though the oxygen vanished from the room. The air around him thickened, his throat tightening with something far more dangerous than rage, fear. He stared down at the image, a younger Nia radiant and proud, standing arm in arm with Reggie Carter. Reggie, the name that hadn't been spoken in this house. The name Bradley had hoped was buried for good. The image was dated. The corners yellowed, but the timestamp burned into the back, made Bradley's stomach lurch. September 16, 2013, 2 weeks before Reggie's mysterious death. 2 weeks before the car accident that no one had truly investigated. Victoria, who had crept closer, glanced over her husband's shoulder. When she saw Reggie's name scribbled on the back, her hand flew to her mouth. You know him? She asked. Bradley didn't answer. He dropped the envelope on the table like it was on fire and stormed into his office. Behind the scenes, chaos bloomed. Bradley doubled security at the gate. A new private surveillance company arrived within hours to sweep the mansion for bugs. Employees were interrogated one by one. Nia's locker was searched without her consent. Her phone mysteriously stopped working after the new Wi-Fi protocols were introduced. Every move she made felt watched, cataloged. But she said nothing. Instead, she picked up a pen and began writing again. Her journal, the same one she'd kept years ago when Reggie was alive, was hidden beneath her mattress. Each night, after the Whitmores were asleep, she documented everything. Timestamps, overheard conversations, discrepancies in Bradley's calendar, the sudden shifts in Victoria's tone. She even noted the brand of USB drives Bradley used, matching the one from the package. The entries weren't just notes. They were confessions, outlines, a growing indictment that mapped out the corruption no one else dared to speak of. Flashbacks began creeping into her nights, uninvited and vivid. She remembered Reggie pacing the living room of their modest Inglewood apartment, his voice full of conviction. He was preparing for a press conference about LAPD corruption, the same one that made headlines 2 days before his death. They don't fear lawyers like me, Nia, he had said, holding a stack of affidavits. But they're terrified of truth from people like us. He always said things like that. Bold, righteous, reckless, maybe, but never afraid. Then came the night of the crash. Or what was called a crash. They said the brakes failed. They said it was raining. But Nia knew Reggie's car like she knew his heartbeat, and it hadn't rained in weeks. Something never added up. Bradley's name had never come up back then. Not directly. But Reggie had mentioned a new tech fund tied to city contracts. Money being funneled into campaigns and police departments through innovation grants. Nia hadn't thought of it in years. But now, that fund was Whitmore Impact. Nia didn't speak to the staff about any of this. But still, a silent shift was happening. Louise, the gardener, began leaving notes in the shed. Little pieces of information, overheard conversations between board members who thought the landscaper couldn't speak English. Maria, the housekeeper, stopped asking questions and started following Nia's lead. Whenever Bradley asked her to keep tabs on the help, she nodded politely, and warned Nia instead. Even Camilla, the Whitmore's teenage daughter, began lingering more in the kitchens, listening in ways she hadn't before. It wasn't a revolution, but it was momentum. Bradley, meanwhile, was unraveling. His presence in the house grew erratic. He rarely left the study. Phone calls were made at all hours, some of them in languages he didn't speak fluently. Once Luis overheard him arguing with someone in French mentioning Panama, the foundation, and something about silencing a loose end. The board of Whitmore Global hadn't said anything publicly, but whispers were already circulating in financial circles. Someone was leaking internal emails, and Bradley knew it had to be someone close. When Victoria asked if it was Nia, he didn't deny it. "She's not just a maid," he muttered. "She's a threat." Victoria had grown quieter too. Her loyalty seemed thinner these days. She'd caught Bradley watching the same photo of Reggie on his tablet for nearly 20 minutes.
"You knew him,"
she said. Bradley looked up. "It's not what you think. Is it ever?" That night she moved into the guest suite. Back in her room, Nia sat with the second photograph again. Reggie's face. Warm, laughing, alive. She traced the edges of the picture as if memory had texture. She remembered that day clearly. It was after one of his court wins. He had defended a black teen falsely accused of assaulting a white officer. He won the case in under 48 hours. They'd celebrated with ice cream and a long walk through Baldwin Hills. He'd leaned down and whispered, "One day, if I disappear, just know my silence wasn't a choice. And power doesn't corrupt, it reveals who's always been rotten." Now his words rang like prophecy. Later that evening, Nia was finishing her journaling when her old prepaid phone rang, an unknown number flashing across the screen. She stared at it, debated not answering, but something told her to pick up. "Ms. Carter?" a voice said. "My name is Ava Monroe. I'm an investigative journalist. You don't know me, but I know about Reggie, and I believe he didn't die by accident." Nia's heart stopped. "I read his case files. I followed your name ever since. I know where he was heading that night, and I know who was trying to stop him." Nia gripped the phone tighter. "I have questions, and I think you have answers," Ava said. "Please, I need to meet you. Tonight." Nia glanced toward the hallway. Silent. Still, but she felt the walls listening. "Where?" "Safe house. Downtown. I'll text you the address. Please don't bring your phone." Click. The line went dead. Nia stared at the black screen, breath trembling. She hadn't spoken Reggie's name to anyone in years. Now a stranger was calling, claiming to know everything, and willing to risk everything to hear more. As Nia slipped the journal into her coat and turned to leave, she noticed something strange in her drawer, tucked beneath her uniform. Another photograph, not from the package. This one was new. A surveillance image of her sitting alone. Right. Someone had been watching her inside the house. The Whitmore estate transformed by evening into a palace of illusion. String lights draped like constellations above the marble terrace, and a string quartet played a haunting rendition of Claire de Lune by the Koi Pond. It was the kind of night people with too much power and too little conscience lived for, where champagne flowed, cameras flashed, and everyone pretended no one was drowning under the surface. Bradley Whitmore stood at the center of it all, dressed in a midnight blue tux, smile razor sharp. Next to him, Victoria sparkled in Valentino, her laughter effortless, her eyes calculating. It was a fundraiser for the Whitmore Impact Foundation, the very organization now under quiet siege. The irony was thick enough to choke. Politicians mingled with socialites, CEOs air-kissed PR managers. Cable news anchors praised Bradley's visionary commitment to urban reform. And no one, not one single guest, noticed the woman in the black service uniform, gliding silently between tables. Nia Carter moved through the gala like a phantom, invisible yet everywhere. Her presence was a contradiction dressed in humility, carrying power. She balanced silver trays like a weapon, her eyes flicking to faces she'd seen on television, to the foundations her late husband once challenged in court. No one looked at her twice. And that was the gift, because tucked in the fold of her apron, hidden beneath linen napkins, was a black USB drive labeled only with one word: truth. Near the center table, a caterer in a loose white shirt moved between guests with practiced grace. Her movements were too precise for a tempire, her gaze too alert. Ava Monroe. She had arrived an hour before guests, posing as backup help. Nia spotted her immediately, their eyes meeting just long enough to acknowledge the plan. The exchange happened during the second course. As Nia passed Ava a tray of stuffed figs, her fingers slid the drive into the journalist's hand without a word. No one noticed. But something electric pulsed in the air, like destiny cracking open. Eva slipped away moments later, vanishing into the staff corridor. Upstairs, Bradley stood before a mirror, loosening his collar. He'd come to his office under the guise of checking emails. In truth, he was breathing hard, sweat dampening his underarms, despite the cool air. Then his phone buzzed. No name, no number, just a message. Tonight, the walls will talk. He stared at it, his pulse thudding in his ears. The words didn't make sense, and yet they made perfect sense. This wasn't coincidence. This was precision. He checked the window. Closed. Curtains drawn. He turned and looked at the ceiling. Was there a mic? A camera? His hand shook as he poured a drink. Back downstairs, Nia continued serving like nothing had changed. Her tray now empty, she drifted toward the edge of the party where the music was loudest and the attention weakest. She looked out at the sea of glittering people. Every one of them had profited from something dirty, and every one of them would soon have to answer for it. She had done it. The evidence had been delivered. The truth was moving. And yet, a part of her trembled. What if Ava didn't follow through? What if she was intercepted? But then again, what if she did? Nia exhaled slowly, like a prisoner unlocking her own cell door from the inside. Bradley came crashing into the servants' quarters without knocking. The door slammed against the wall. The clatter echoed like a gunshot. Nia was folding linen napkins when he stormed in. She didn't flinch. Not this time. His voice was low, venomous. What did you give her? She looked up slowly. I'm just doing my job. Don't play games with me. Bradley stepped closer. There was a tremble in his hands he couldn't hide. You don't know what you're playing with, Nia. She didn't answer. I will bury you. I will make sure no one hires you again. I'll turn this city against you. Still, no reply. Only a gaze that had stopped fearing him a long time ago. He hissed, You think you're powerful? You're a maid in a house you don't belong in. And then, for the first time ever, she looked him dead in the eyes. I don't belong in cages either. But here we are. For a moment something broke behind his eyes. Rage met helplessness. He wanted to scream, to strike, but he knew there were eyes everywhere now, even in shadows. He turned and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the silverware. Nia stood alone, her breath even, the napkin still folded in her hands. Outside, the gala continued. Applause, laughter, the illusion intact. But inside, something had been detonated. The fuse was lit. At 3:14 a.m., Nia lay in bed with her eyes open. She hadn't slept. Down the hall, she heard Victoria's heels click-clacking on marble. Somewhere, a child coughed. The house was alive with sleep. But Nia knew peace had left hours ago. Her phone, tucked beneath the pillow, buzzed. One text, from Ava. You were right. Everything matches. It's bigger than we thought. Nia stared at the screen. She didn't smile, just breathed in the silence. The next morning, America woke to a different kind of sunrise. Bradley Whitmore's face flashed across every screen from smartphones to gas station TVs. Anchors spoke urgently over footage of luxury yachts and ledgers with missing figures. Breaking news. Whitmore impact under federal investigation. Photos of cash bundles. Names of fake charities. The foundation allegedly laundering money through shell organizations tied to international arms dealers. And then one line that made Nia's breath catch. Internal whistleblowers cite years of fraudulent activity, led by CEO Bradley Whitmore, with evidence now in the hands of federal prosecutors. He had been exposed. The empire had cracked. But it wasn't the headlines that made Nia sit upright. It was the still image flashed at the end of the segment. A blurry, grainy photo from the gala. Of her, holding a tray, staring directly into the camera. That image wasn't taken by a guest or a reporter. Ava never took pictures. So who was watching Nia from the crowd? And why? The internet did what it always does. Consume, react, and explode. Within hours of Ava Monroe's expose hitting the digital front page of the Ledger, social media detonated into a storm of outrage, support, and disbelief. Screens glowed with hashtags in every language. Whitmore exposed trended globally. Justice for the workers became a rallying cry. Anonymous users unearthed old clips of Bradley's awkward interviews, resurfacing a 2017 moment where he joked that Maid see too much. The clip was edited with eerie precision, and some of them remember everything. The article hit hard. It wasn't just the financial fraud. It was the human toll. The piece didn't name Nia, but referred to a longtime black employee of the Whitmore household who had kept detailed journals documenting shady operations and the silent intimidation culture that permeated the estate. Ava included carefully curated quotes, enough to stir emotions but not enough to expose identities. Silence is a currency the powerful expect the poor to trade in. But I have nothing left to buy their comfort. Anonymous Whitmore staff member journal entry. It was bold, haunting, and unmistakably Nia. Though her name wasn't public, Nia felt the heat as though a spotlight had been drilled into her back. Every hallway felt tighter. Every silence carried more weight. The walls of the mansion seemed to lean in closer now, whispering warnings from decades of compliance. Bradley didn't wait long to fight back. By that afternoon, he was seated across from a smirking anchor on a daytime political talk show, his voice filled with a measured tremble, part anger, part desperation. "I'm the victim of a politically motivated hit job," he declared. "Someone inside my own home, my own staff, decided to twist my generosity into something sinister. This is a smear campaign against a successful man trying to do good." The host tried to pivot. "But the evidence, I'm telling you," he cut in, finger pointed, voice raised. "I'm being framed by someone who clearly doesn't understand the difference between hard work and sabotage." His smugness backfired instantly. Clips of the interview were edited by activists within minutes. One video contrasted his generosity with photos of shuttered community centers supposedly funded by his foundation. Another video showed his home's opulence beside low-income schools whose funding disappeared after partnering with Whitmore Impact. His image, once untouchable, now seemed pathetic, fractured, and then dangerous. Back inside the mansion, the atmosphere curdled. Victoria was livid. She cornered Nia in the laundry room. The next morning, gripping her coffee cup like a weapon, her manicured nails tapped the ceramic with rage. "You ruined us," she said, her voice trembling with entitlement. "You and your pathetic sense of martyrdom. You just had to be the hero, didn't you?" Nia didn't look up from folding bedsheets. Victoria's voice cracked. "You think anyone cares about you? They'll forget your story in a week. But we'll live with this forever." "I've lived with worse," Nia said softly. "Don't you dare play the victim." "I'm not." Nia met her eyes finally, steady and quiet. "I'm the witness." Victoria recoiled. It was the first time Nia had spoken to her like that, like an equal, or worse for Victoria, a threat. Camilla had been listening from the hallway. The Whitmore's 17-year-old daughter, usually silent and hardened from years of golden upbringing, had become something else in the firestorm. Curious. That night, she knocked on Nia's door. Just one. Nia opened it slowly. Camilla stood in leggings and an oversized hoodie, makeup wiped off, her hands curled nervously around her phone. "I read the article," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's about you." Nia said nothing, but she didn't close the door. Camilla stepped inside. "I used to think this house was the safest place on earth," she whispered, looking around Nia's small room. "Now I think it's just the most expensive prison." She sat on the edge of the bed. "Thank you for telling the truth, even if no one wanted to hear it." Nia watched her, unsure what to say. Camilla looked up, tears in her eyes. "Can I show people my truth too?" That night, she began live streaming from inside the mansion. Her account, at Gilded Ghost, started with a single 5-minute video. Her talking about growing up in silence, about seeing workers smile without being seen, about the moments she overheard her father threaten staff in low tones, and the way her mother's voice would drop whenever black or brown workers entered a room. It went viral overnight. The world was no longer just hearing about the Whitmores, they were watching them fall apart in real time. Nia thought about quitting. The attention, even anonymous, was becoming unbearable. She felt it in the staff's glances, in the way the mailman lingered too long, in the neighborhood joggers who stared a second longer than before. "I didn't want any of this," she told Luis one afternoon by the greenhouse. "I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted the truth and peace." Luis wiped sweat from his forehead. "You've already shaken the throne. Don't stop now." She looked away, blinking fast. Luis added, "They didn't expect you to survive this long. That alone is rebellion." She nodded slowly. "Reggie used to say, truth doesn't need permission. It just needs someone willing to bleed for it." "You bleeding?" Nia inhaled. Every day, the final blow that week, came not from a news outlet, But a courtroom. A legal document arrived at the mansion on crisp white paper, delivered by a man in a gray suit with emotionless eyes. Nia opened it at the kitchen table, while the dishwasher hummed behind her. Whitmore vs. Carter. Civil lawsuit. Defamation and breach of non-disclosure. Bradley had filed a lawsuit. He was suing her personally. The irony twisted like a knife. She, who had remained silent for 5 years, now accused of speaking too loudly. Louise found her sitting still an hour later, the letter untouched beside her. "You okay?" he asked. Nia shook her head slowly. "He's going to use the system to punish me. Same one that killed Reggie." Louise looked at her, voice low. "Then maybe it's time we stop playing defense." Nia looked up, something steely igniting behind her tired eyes. That night, as the lawsuit story spread through the press, Ava Monroe called again, but her voice wasn't steady this time. "Nia, you need to hear this," she whispered. "Someone inside Whitmore Global just contacted me, a whistleblower, and they're ready to name names, including yours." The envelope that arrived at the Whitmore estate bore the federal court seal, unmistakable, unignorable. Nia stood in the foyer, staring at it like it was radioactive. Her hands trembled as she slid her finger beneath the flap, pulling out page after page of sterile legal language, dressed in sharp accusations. Defamation, breach of confidentiality, malicious intent. The last line hit like a gut punch. Plaintiff seeks full damages and permanent gag order. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a warning to every worker who ever dared speak. Bradley wasn't defending his name. He was making Nia an example. She sat alone on the back steps that night, coat wrapped tight against the chill. The concrete pressed into her spine, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts spun like a carousel, each ride uglier than the last. How do you fight someone who owns the system? She didn't hear the steps behind her until a soft voice spoke. "I was wondering when you'd call." Nia turned. Tasha Lomax, Reggie's oldest friend, civil rights lawyer, firebrand, unapologetic and undefeated. They hadn't spoken in years. Not since Reggie's funeral. But somehow Tasha had sensed it. Maybe Ava had reached out. Maybe fate had intervened. Tasha sat beside her without asking, long braids tucked beneath a wool fedora. "You look tired, girl." "I am. You ready to get louder?" Nia didn't respond right away. Her voice, when it came, cracked. "They're trying to erase me." Tasha smiled. "A slow, dangerous thing. Then let's make you unforgettable." Court began the following week. The courtroom was a mirror of America itself. Pristine wood paneling, judges in robes, and rows of white men in tailored suits, pretending to care about the truth. The press filled every available seat, cameras stationed outside like vultures on rooftops. Bradley arrived flanked by 2 high-powered attorneys. He wore navy and arrogance. His posture said wronged. His smirk said untouchable. Nia entered through the side door with Tasha. No entourage, no makeup. Just quiet resolve. The room tilted, even before testimony began. Bradley's legal team wasted no time in character assassination. They called Nia, a disgruntled employee, emotionally fragile, a long-serving domestic worker, whose resentment escalated into fabrication. They showed heavily redacted employment documents. One attorney even quoted a disciplinary report from 2019, filed after Nia accidentally broke a dish. "She's been harboring a vendetta for years," they insisted, and now in the midst of Mr. Whitmore's public scrutiny, she seized the moment to destroy his reputation. They cited the leaked journal entries, the anonymous tips. They implied she had been coerced or compensated by outside parties. Bradley sat, expression perfectly neutral. His performance was chilling. Then it was Tasha's turn. She didn't walk to the podium. She strode. She didn't start with evidence. She started with a question. What does silence cost a black woman who's seen too much? The courtroom held its breath. "This isn't about Mr. Whitmore's reputation," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "This is about the exploitation of labor, of invisibility, of how a man with power used his image to hide injustice, and how one woman dared to say, 'Enough.'" Tasha brought receipts, metaphorically and literally, anonymous testimony from staff members, financial inconsistencies, a timeline that aligned perfectly with Nia's journal entries. But it was Luis who tipped the scales. They called him as a witness on day 3. He took the stand in a plain button-down, hands folded, voice steady. "I worked at Whitmore HQ before I was a gardener," he said. "I saw Mr. Whitmore personally shred documents after hours. Once I found receipts that had been trashed before public audits. The timeline matches the money that went missing from the foundation. Why didn't you say anything sooner? The prosecutor asked. Luis looked directly at the jury. Because people like me lose jobs for talking, and people like him get statues. The courtroom rippled. Bradley flinched. During recess, Bradley was caught whispering harshly to his lawyer, face flushed with panic. The camera caught it. The moment aired on 3 major networks before court resumed. The judge, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes, returned to the bench with a decision. She wasn't ready to dismiss the case entirely. But she wasn't blind either. Given the volume of testimonial evidence and indications of retaliatory intent, I am allowing the defendant, Ms. Carter, the right to countersue. The matter of wrongful lawsuit and labor intimidation will be added to the docket. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Nia had officially gone from defendant to contender. That night, back in her small room beneath the mansion's towering ceilings, Nia stared at the court documents like they were prayers etched in ink. She had won a small battle, but the war was still sprawling ahead. Camilla knocked again. She sat beside Nia, eyes wide. You're brave, she said softly. I'm scared, Nia replied. Being both is what makes it real. Camilla handed her a small note. This came for you while you were in court. It was a subpoena. She was being called to testify again, this time by the state. Leave, on national television. As Nia read the details, her eyes froze on the name listed next to hers. Another witness scheduled to testify. It wasn't Luis. It wasn't Ava. It was Victoria Whitmore. The courthouse buzzed like a live wire. Outside, the street was a blur of protest signs, enchanted slogans. Protect the truth. We are Nia. Believe black women. A sea of fists rose into the August sky, their energy crackling through the hot air. Police lined the sidewalks but kept their distance. The crowd was loud but disciplined, angry but focused. Inside it was no quieter. Reporters lined the benches, pens scribbling furiously. Court artists hovered, sketching furrowed brows and trembling lips. Cameramen adjusted tripods behind velvet ropes. Every major network was live streaming the hearing. The moment had transcended scandal. It had become history. Nia sat in the witness box, hands folded in her lap. Her hair was pinned tight, her posture straight, but her chest rose and fell with silent urgency. Her name wasn't just being whispered anymore. It was being watched. The bailiff called for quiet. The judge turned to her with a nod. Miss Carter, you may begin. Nia stood slowly. She didn't carry papers or notes, just herself, just truth. She began not with facts but with memory. I've worked in the Whitmore household for 5 years, she said, her voice low but clear. I cleaned toilets that politicians sat on, folded napkins for billionaires who never learned my name, and wiped up after children who were taught I was invisible. Silence draped the room like velvet. I've heard deals worth millions whispered over my head. I've watched people change personalities depending on who was in the room. And I've watched powerful men treat black labor like wallpaper, necessary, replaceable, and silent. She paused, looking up. I was never meant to speak. Bradley sat at his table, lips pressed into a thin line, one hand trembling slightly against the armrest. Nia spoke slowly, methodically, as if unspooling years of silence from her chest. She spoke of the small things first, the unpaid overtime, the withheld bonuses, the way Victoria would have her redo beds 3 times because she liked the look of obedience. She described being called girl at age 47, how you people echoed through marble halls as casually as ordering sparkling water. But it wasn't just language, she continued. It was patterns, habits. It was watching a system, perfectly dressed in philanthropy, hide its rot. The prosecution objected, claiming speculation. The judge overruled it. Nia pressed forward. She detailed the donations Bradley's NGO made to nonprofits that never received them. She described shredded receipts, coded calls, and employees fired for asking too many questions. And then she did something no one expected. She pulled out her journal. Tasha had fought to admit it into evidence, and the judge had allowed excerpts. Nia held the battered notebook gently, then began reading.
May 14, 2021.
Bradley yelled at Maria again, called her accent lazy, said the donors don't like hearing reminders of where their money should have gone. October 2, 2022. Found invoices stamped cleared that didn't match outgoing wire transfers. Shredded the next day. Each entry was a wound reopened. Every sentence, a brick removed from Bradley's fortress. But then came the moment. The one that cracked something inside. Even the most stone-faced viewer. I didn't come here to destroy a man, Nia said. I came here because my husband died trying to tell the truth. And I didn't. I stayed quiet. I chose survival. Her voice trembled. But I remember the last words he said to me before he left that night. She swallowed hard. He kissed my forehead and said, "If something happens, don't let it be for nothing." A single tear slipped down her cheek. Her voice broke. Now I finally understand what that meant. The room was motionless. Even the judge looked away. Outside, the crowd had grown louder, responding in real time to the live stream. People began holding signs with Reggie's face on them. Camilla Whitmore, once the girl in the shadow of a golden lie, stood at the courthouse steps, clutching her own sign. Believe black women. A journalist caught her on camera, asked if she supported her father's innocence. Camilla didn't flinch. I believe her. I know what it's like to be ignored in a house full of noise. Inside, Victoria sat 3 rows behind her husband. Her hands clutched a silk handkerchief, but it didn't hide her shaking. As Nia continued, Victoria's facade began to crack. The elegance slipped. When Nia read the entry about a gala where Victoria had instructed her to use the back staircase to avoid being seen by guests. Your presence is more noticeable than your absence. Something inside Victoria broke. She stood up, heels clacking against the marble floor, and rushed out of the courtroom. Tears streaked her makeup like war paint. The press followed. Back on the stand, Nia inhaled deeply. I used to think I was the only one. That silence made me safe. But it only made me smaller. She looked directly at the cameras. Who else is being made small right now? Because someone powerful told them to hush. Who else is sweeping up after lies they didn't spill? A beat of silence. I'm not here to be a hero. I'm here because I finally chose not to be a ghost. The judge thanked her. The courtroom remained frozen as she stepped down, her steps slow, deliberate, like someone walking through the ashes of something sacred. That evening, the footage was replayed across the nation. News anchors choked up. Activists cited Nia's words in rallies and blogs. The phrase "don't let it be for nothing" trended worldwide. High school students quoted her during graduation speeches. A local pastor in Atlanta called her the modern-day Rosa Parks of invisible labor. But while the nation watched, something else moved in the shadows. Eva Monroe, still embedded deep in her investigation, received a message on her encrypted app. You name, Ninal Sawyer. I work inside Whitmore Global. I've seen what they tried to cover up. I have documents, names, timelines. I know what they did to Reggie Carter. Ova's fingers hovered over the keys. Breath held. She replied, "How do I know this isn't a trap?" The response came instantly. Because I was supposed to silence Nia. And I didn't. The whistleblower sends Ava the first file. But it's not about Reggie or Bradley. It's about someone Nia never suspected. Victoria Whitmore. The document Ava received wasn't what she expected. Victoria Whitmore's name was printed in bold on the header of a financial oversight file. The contents detailed a private account, hidden, nested within layers of charity disbursements, that redirected funds from supposedly philanthropic ventures into luxury investments, including a vineyard in southern France and a private island development in Belize. The account required dual authorization, and the signatures? One was Bradley's. The other was Victoria's. Ava's hands shook as she scrolled through the file's metadata. The timestamps matched dates of highly publicized donations. Public appearances where Victoria smiled beside orphaned children, while her wire transfers purchased marble floors for a house the public never saw. And at the bottom of the file was a name she hadn't encountered before. Jordan Lee. Jordan Lee had worked quietly within the beast. As a senior financial analyst at Whitmore Enterprises, he had seen it all. How budgets were inflated, how taxes were avoided with surgical precision, and how undocumented workers were paid off books to run logistics for shell NGOs. He hadn't said a word, until now. It was the exposure of Nia's testimony that broke something in him. Watching her stand, dignified, against a machine built to crush women like her, triggered a moral whiplash. Jordan had helped design some of those ledgers. He had signed off on numbers that erased people. He contacted Ava through an encrypted server. He didn't want payment. He didn't want protection. He wanted the truth to bleed. Ava verified the documents twice before publishing. Her second expose was longer, more explosive than the first. This one included receipts, literal receipts, anonymous quotes from internal staff, Photos of the undocumented warehouse workers, their faces blurred but postures broken. A spreadsheet comparing the foundation's public filings against the internal logs Jordan had smuggled out. The piece dropped at 6:00 a.m. Pacific time. By 6:45, Whitmore Global's stock price began to plummet. By 8 a.m., a memo was leaked to shareholders. Effective immediately, Bradley Whitmore will be stepping down as CEO pending an internal audit. By noon, the Department of Labor had opened an investigation. The house of cards had started to fall. The Whitmore mansion, once a fortress of quiet elegance, became a war zone of whispered arguments, slammed doors, and panic. Victoria stopped sleeping in the master bedroom. Her attorneys arrived through the back entrance. Camilla didn't return home at all. Victoria's legal team filed for legal separation 2 days later. The filing cited irreconcilable moral dissonance. Bradley was stunned. He had always seen Victoria as a permanent fixture, decorative, complicit, and ultimately loyal. But Victoria was a Whitmore by marriage, not blood, and when her image became tethered to a collapsing empire, she cut the cord. Camilla's response was louder. She published an op-ed in the New York Voice, a sharp reflective essay that ran with a black and white photograph of her at age 9, sitting beside her father at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. I was taught to smile in pictures and say nothing in pain. My silence was learned. My voice is mine now. She wrote of growing up in a house where power spoke louder than fairness, where staff were ignored until they made mistakes, and where she was taught not to question the origin of her privilege. Nia Carter is the woman I wish I had the courage to become. I believe her. I believe my father built this house on the backs of the unheard, and I am done being part of the decor. The article was shared over 2 million times in under 24. Inside her modest guest suite at a safe house on the outskirts of LA, Nia sat at the edge of the bed, watching the world burn from a distance. She had been temporarily relocated after her public testimony, an agreement between her legal team and the court to ensure her safety from retaliation. Luis had helped pack her things. Camilla had hugged her tightly before she left. And yet, even in this new quiet, peace felt borrowed. Her journal sat open beside her, not to document the day, but to revisit it. She reread Reggie's name, again and again. A knock at the door snapped her out of the page. A package had been left outside, no return label, no markings, just her name in block letters, on the front. Nia stared at it for a moment, then brought it inside. Her hands moved slowly, cautiously peeling back the brown paper. Inside was a photograph. Just one. It was a police evidence photo, but not one she had seen before. Reggie's car. Post-crash. The frame twisted. The windshield cracked in a perfect starburst. But circled in red ink was something new. The brake line. And a handwritten note. Tampered. Post-mortem cover-up confirmed. See attached diagnostics. J. Nia froze. Her breath stopped. The truth she had only feared for years had now materialized in ink, in evidence, in finality. They hadn't just let Reggie die. They had helped him. She flipped the photo over. A second paper was tucked behind it. A mechanical diagram with annotations and timestamps. The handwriting matched Jordan's known files. Reggie's brakes had been deliberately damaged. A second line of the note read, Victoria authorized emergency cleanup expenses the same day. Nia's world tilted. Victoria. Not just Bradley. Victoria. Nia stood in the middle of the room, hands shaking, vision swimming. What did that mean? Had Victoria known about the plan? Had she been involved before or after? The woman who had scolded her for disrupting the peace. The woman who once told her, you work for us. You stay in your lane. The woman who had cried in court. How much of that was real? Her phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. They'll come for you now. Be ready. A knock echoes again, this time louder, sharper. When Nia opens the door, she's not alone on the porch. Standing there, pale and wide-eyed, is Victoria Whitmore herself, and she's holding the same photo of Reggie's crash. Victoria's breath fogged slightly in the cool morning air. She stood at the threshold of Nia's safe house with trembling hands, clutching the photograph as if it had scorched her fingers. Her face, usually porcelain and composed, was stripped raw. No makeup, no jewelry, just bare skin and haunted eyes. Nia stared at her, unmoving. Her heart pounded like a warning drum. Victoria held out the photo. It was identical to the one Nia had received. Reggie's twisted car, the circled brake line, the scrawled note. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. I didn't know, she whispered. Not like this. Nia's jaw clenched. You signed the cleanup order. Victoria flinched. I was told it was routine, she said quickly. That it was part of a city-funded relief payout. That someone needed emergency funds released to protect corporate interests. I didn't. She stopped, shook her head and stared at the ground. I didn't ask questions. That's how people die, Victoria, Nia said, her voice steady. You don't need to pull the trigger, you just look away. Victoria's lip trembled. I didn't come here to beg for forgiveness. Good, Nia said sharply. Because you won't get it. But she didn't slam the door. Instead, she turned and let the woman follow. That night, Nia lay awake with the photo on her chest. Reggie's smile dancing through her memories like static in a storm. She'd told herself for years that the crash was just another tragedy, the kind that happened when the truth got too close to power. But now, something colder had entered the narrative. This wasn't neglect. This was murder. Her mind replayed their last conversation in painful loops. If something happens to me, Reggie had said that night, adjusting his tie in the mirror, make them remember me, not for dying, but for what I lived to uncover. And she had failed him. Until now. The next morning, Nia drove out to the site of the crash. It was still there, quiet and unmarked, on the edge of a winding two-lane road, half forgotten by the city. A rusted guardrail curved like a scar along the embankment. The trees had grown back, reclaiming the space where metal had twisted, and lives had changed. She stood there for a long time, counting the distance from the road to the ravine, imagining how Reggie's car must have flipped, where his body landed, how long he'd lain there before someone found him. The wind carried the scent of pine and gasoline memory. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She took a photo of the guardrail, then another of the soil. She crouched low and touched the earth where his tires had left no visible trace. She had come to say goodbye. Instead, she vowed to reopen the door he died trying to unlock. Enter Detective Simone Grant. Retired, but not out of the fight. She answered the door in a navy robe, gray at her temples, and sharp in the eyes. She'd heard of the trial. She'd watched Nia's testimony on television. And when Nia said Reggie's name, she didn't blink. She just opened the door wider. You're late, Simone said. I've been waiting for someone to care. They sat in her cluttered living room surrounded by dusty file boxes, old award plaques, and the quiet hum of a city that had forgotten its own secrets. Simone poured tea. She didn't offer sugar. I was the first on the scene that morning, she said. Before the feds showed up. Before the private suits came and told me to stand down. Private suits? Nia asked. White men. Unbadged. Moved like military but weren't. Claimed to be from a city partner security unit. Said they were there on orders from a government contract linked to Bradley's old firm. Nia's stomach flipped. They sealed the wreck before we finished the forensics, Simone said. Took the reports, told us to log it as driver error. And you did? I filed the official report. But I kept copies. Simone walked into the next room and returned with a battered cardboard folder. Nia opened it slowly. Photographs. Brake diagnostics. A chemical test showing traces of hydraulic tampering, too faint for casual detection. All of it dated and initialed. Her hands shook. This is evidence, she whispered. Simone nodded. Evidence no one wanted to see, until now. The deeper they dug, the worse it became. Bradley had quietly contracted a private security firm during the time of Reggie's investigation. Its name Lucent Risk Solutions. The same firm that received payout transfers on the same day Reggie died. When Nia cross-referenced the transfers with Jordan Lee's files, the matches were undeniable. Reggie had been investigating two things when he died: widespread misuse of police discretionary funds and Whitmore's NGO finances, both of which fed into Lucent's offshore accounts. He was close, Simone said. Too close, and they knew it. Simone looked at her, over the rim of her mug. Do you want to finish what he started? Nia nodded. With everything I have left. That night, Nia received a burner message through Ava's encrypted channel. A Lucent employee had come forward. They wouldn't speak over the phone, wouldn't email. They insisted on meeting in person, off-record, off-grid. They left only a location. A remote gas station on the edge of town. Midnight. 1 hour. And a warning. Come alone. Trust no one. Nia didn't hesitate. She told no one. Not even Simone. She slipped out the back of the safe house, tucked her journal into her coat, and drove into the darkness. Every bump in the road echoed like a heartbeat. Every passing car felt like a threat. But she didn't turn back. She reached the gas station at 12:07 a.m. A single pump flickered beneath a rusting canopy. The convenience store lights were dimmed. A truck idled nearby, its engine low and steady. Then the passenger door opened. A man stepped out. Tall. Latino. Early 40s. Hoodie pulled low. His hands were empty. His eyes were tired.
You Nia?
He asked. She nodded. I worked cleanup on Reggie Carter's crash, he said. I can't carry this anymore. Nia's pulse surged. What did you see? He reached into his coat. He pulled out a phone, but instead of a recording, he showed Nia a photo she'd never seen. Reggie, alive, injured, leaning against a tree, minutes after the crash. The timestamp proved it, which meant he didn't die on impact. The image haunted Nia the entire drive. Reggie, slumped against a tree, bleeding but alive. His left arm cradled his ribs, his face contorted in pain, but unmistakably breathing. The timestamp didn't lie, 11:23 p.m. The official time of death was listed as 11. 5 minutes. 5 minutes that changed everything. He could have been saved. He should have been saved. And someone, somewhere, had made a choice. The man who showed her the image didn't stay long. He gave her a name, Elias Monroe, and a time 3:00 a.m. That night, a warehouse near the old port of Long Beach. That's where it happened, he said. That's where you'll get your answers. He handed her a burner phone with GPS coordinates already loaded and walked away, fading into the darkness before she could ask more. Nia stood in the middle of the gas station, heart hammering, the future unraveling around her like smoke. She didn't call anyone, didn't text Louis, didn't tell Ava or even Simone. If what she suspected was true, if Elias was who he claimed to be, then he was the thread that unraveled the entire fabric. And she had learned the hard way that too many ears could ruin a confession before it even reached a recorder. So she drove. Long Beach lay ahead in slumber, silent under the weight of industry. The freeway hissed under her tires as the horizon blurred into oil refineries and stacked cargo containers. The GPS led her off the main road, through a gravel lot lined with barbed wire and half-dismantled forklifts. A single warehouse sat beneath a flickering sodium light, skeletal and rusted, like a monument to forgotten truths. She parked, took a breath, and stepped inside. The air inside the warehouse was thick with dust and regret. Stacks of old shipping crates leaned into the corners. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, and in the center of it all stood a man with his back to her, tall, gaunt, wearing a faded military jacket and fingerless gloves. He turned slowly.
Elias Monroe.
His eyes were hollow, but alert, his face carved by time and guilt. A faint scar ran down his temple, just visible beneath the shadow of a beanie. You came alone? He asked. Nia nodded. No choice. Elias studied her for a long moment, before motioning her forward. Then you're smarter than most. They sat on opposite sides of a crate. Elias placed a small black voice recorder on the wooden surface and pressed play. Static crackled. Then a voice calm clipped, unmistakably Bradley. If he keeps digging, escalate. Do it quietly. Use the secondary channel. I don't want this traced back to my desk. Nia's breath caught. Elias pressed pause. I was the one they called, he said. Lucent subcontracted to a private shell called Marlowe Group. That shell got its directives from Whitmore Holdings. I was on a 3-man unit assigned to contain hostile exposures. He looked at her. You understand what that means, right? Nia's voice was brittle. You murdered my husband. Elias flinched. No, he said. I disabled the brakes. That's all. Protocol was to keep him alive, send a warning, scare him off. She scoffed bitterly. Well, it worked. Elias's face twisted. But that's not how it was supposed to end. I left once I heard he didn't survive. I walked. I've been off the grid since. Nia's fists clenched. You left? That's your apology? No, Elias said quietly. This is... He slid a flash drive across the crate. Everything. Audio logs. Transfer orders. Transaction chains. I kept copies just in case someone decided to silence me next. Nia stared at it. So small. So deadly. I watched you testify, Elias said after a pause. You reminded me of my mother. She worked cleaning offices downtown. Came home with cracked heels and a straight spine. I didn't grow up racist, Nia. I grew up desperate, and they knew how to use that. She didn't let him off the hook. You helped break a man who believed in something, and now you want absolution, because your conscience woke up late. No, Elias said, voice low. I don't want forgiveness. I want justice. And I want out. He handed her a slip of paper. It had a number, a contact in Geneva, a bank account with connections to Whitmore's offshore funds. A way to trace the money back to Bradley's personal directives. Give this to your people. Make it count. Nia left the warehouse with the drive pressed tight in her coat pocket, her entire body buzzing with adrenaline and nausea. Everything she needed was in her hands now. The truth. The proof. The final blow. By sunrise, she was back in her safe house. She called Ava. Meet me, now. They met in the back of a shuttered library, away from cameras and microphones. Ava took the drive, scanned the contact list, listened to one of the audio clips, and said only 2 words. This ends him. Her fingers trembled as she texted her editor. Publishing next wave. National file drop at 4 p.m. PST. But just as she pressed send, her phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. A cease and desist letter appeared, digitally signed and watermarked by Bradley Whitmore's legal team. Only this one wasn't just about defamation or confidentiality. It claimed the files, if published, could compromise national security. The email cited classified communication protocols tied to high-level government partnerships, a legal gray zone that could land both Ava and Nia in federal custody if they went public without clearance. Ava's hands shook. He's bluffing, she said, pacing. He has to be bluffing. But her eyes betrayed the fear creeping in.
Nia stayed still.
He's not bluffing, she said. He's bleeding. And men like Bradley don't go quietly. They burn everything behind them. Ava looked at her. So, what do we do? Nia didn't answer. She just stared out the window, watching as a black SUV idled across the street, engine running. Minutes later, Ava's editor calls, not to confirm the story, but to tell her the servers have been breached, and every file about Elias, Reggie, and the crash has been erased. Ava sat at the edge of her editor's desk, frozen, her face pale under the fluorescent lights of the newsroom's emergency server bay. The voice on the phone repeated the same sentence with increasing panic. They're gone. All of them. The drive files, the cloud backups, everything's been scrubbed. AIM. She didn't blink. Nia, across the room, said nothing either. Her eyes locked on Ava's, unflinching. They both knew what this meant. Bradley hadn't just threatened. He had retaliated. And yet Nia wasn't rattled. Not this time. Her entire body had the stillness of someone who'd been betrayed by systems before. She exhaled slowly, and said only, he's still bleeding, and bleeding things leave trails. By morning, Ava had regrouped with a new plan. She reached out not to one outlet, but to many, a decentralized network of activist journalists, cyber whistleblowers, and black-run independent news organizations, with firewalls too wild for Whitmore's team to dismantle in one sweep. They uploaded the Elias confession, all of it, to mirrored drives, streaming platforms, and hidden wikis. It wasn't just the audio. It was the voice transcriptions, the metadata, the financial records Elias had recovered from offshore accounts. Even the handwritten notes about escalation, signed by Whitmore's VP of Operations. The release wasn't clean. It was a detonation. By noon, the phrase "Shan escalation orders" trended across the globe. Within 24 hours, clips of Bradley's voice played over footage of black mothers crying, workers protesting outside of gleaming glass towers, and headlines that read like indictments. Each CEO tied to whistleblower's death. Whitmore Holdings funded suppression of black activists' investigation. Private security operatives admit to break tampering in civil rights attorney's death. The world didn't whisper anymore. It roared. Whitmore Global's headquarters transformed into a fortress under siege. Protesters flooded the sidewalks, blocking entrances, chanting beneath floor-to-ceiling windows. The company's logo, once synonymous with innovation, now conjured images of corruption and cover-ups. Signs read, "No more billionaire burying. Reggie Carter deserved justice. You made her invisible. Now you see her." Camilla, standing at the front lines, live-streamed daily. She no longer called herself a Whitmore. She wore a sweatshirt that read, "I was raised in silence. I choose sound." Pressure mounted in Washington. Congressional leaders demanded an inquiry. Senator Eliza Harwood issued a televised statement. We are launching a bipartisan investigation into corporate collusion, abuse of nonprofit status, and the use of private contractors to suppress American citizens, exercising their constitutional rights. Other CEOs scrambled to distance themselves. Donations dried up. Partnerships dissolved overnight. And Bradley? He vanished. For nearly 48 hours the media speculated. Rumors swirled that he'd boarded a private plane to the Cayman Islands. That he'd withdrawn $17 million in cryptocurrency. That he'd been spotted at a border checkpoint dressed as a courier. Nia didn't celebrate. Not yet. Not until the system proved it could hold the powerful accountable. The arrest came quietly. At 3:12 a.m., a tactical FBI unit intercepted Bradley's private jet just before takeoff on a remote runway outside San Diego. The pilot had been bribed, but the feds had been tipped off by Elias in exchange for immunity. Bradley's face was captured in blurry footage, eyes half-lidded, hands zip-tied behind his back. He wore a designer jacket, and the smirk of a man still convinced the world was just a courtroom waiting to be bought. Later that morning, Nia stood outside the federal courthouse, flanked by Ava and Tasha. Luis and Simone were there too. So was Victoria, dressed in plain black, her head low, her wedding ring gone. It had rained that morning. The city smelled like steel and fresh memory. The reporters formed a gauntlet, shoving mics and flashing cameras. The noise was chaotic, but Nia moved through it like water, steady, composed. Then, at the base of the courthouse steps, the black SUV pulled up. Bradley exited slowly, escorted by 2 U.S. Marshals. He looked thinner, pallid, but his eyes still scanned the crowd with calculated defiance. And when he saw Nia standing tall in a gray wool coat, her shoulders back, he smiled, not with charm, with warning. As he passed her, he leaned in just enough for his voice to cut like ice. "You think this ends with me?" Nia didn't flinch, but something inside her shifted, because she knew Bradley wasn't just a man. He was a symptom, and symptoms come from deeper diseases. She stared at his retreating back as the courthouse doors swallowed him whole. Then she turned to Ava. "Find the next thread." Moments later, a stranger approaches Nia on the courthouse steps. An older black man in a pressed blue coat. He hands her a folder and says quietly, "Reggie was investigating more than just Whitmore. He was looking into judges too. And one of them is still on your case." The man's hand trembled slightly as he passed Nia the folder. He didn't give a name, only a look. One of recognition, not of who she was now, but who she had always been. "Reggie trusted few," he murmured, "but he trusted me with this. Said if anything happened to him, and if it ever came back to Whitmore, to give it to his wife." Nia took the folder with both hands. Her fingers grazed the worn cardboard, soft at the edges like it had been handled 100 times. She didn't speak. The man nodded once, turned, and disappeared into the crowd, swallowed by signs, chants, and siren. Inside the folder were copies of Reggie's old notes, handwritten, time-stamped, annotated. But one document stood out, a list of names, CEOs, judges, prosecutors, all connected by offshore transactions, shared lobbying firms, and secret meetings logged only in travel records. This wasn't about just Bradley. It never had been. A week later, the Capitol floor echoed with flashbulbs and anticipation. Nia Carter was scheduled to testify before Congress. It had taken months of legal maneuvering, advocacy, and national outrage, but the hearings on systemic corporate exploitation and whistleblower retaliation had finally begun. And Nia wasn't just another witness. She was the case that broke the dam. Ava, Simone, Camilla, Luis, and even Victoria sat in the gallery behind her. Tasha stood at her side, face sharp with pride. Nia stepped to the microphone slowly, the silence deafening in its respect. She placed her notes down but didn't read from them. "My name is Nia Carter," she began. "I cleaned homes for people who never looked me in the eye. I folded clothes for families who couldn't pronounce mine. I served dinners to men who later rewrote the rules to steal from the very workers who made their empires possible." She looked around the chamber. "I was taught to be grateful for crumbs, but my husband died chasing truth. And I've learned that silence protects no one but the guilty." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "My name may be new to you, but there are thousands more like me, invisible, tired, and ready." She stepped back, and the room, stiff and traditional, erupted. The hearings led to a wave of investigations. Within weeks, 4 additional CEOs were subpoenaed for similar offshore laundering schemes. tied to fraudulent charities. One had been a keynote speaker at a women's empowerment conference. 2 months prior, another had pledged millions to racial equity initiatives, while quietly funneling funds into luxury real estate. A storm had been awakened. But what gave it structure, what made it real, was the legislation. It was dubbed the Carter Act, drafted by a coalition of lawmakers, and backed by the overwhelming pressure of public outrage. It outlined landmark protections for domestic workers, whistleblowers in private sectors, and employees bound by exploitative NDAs. The act mandated third-party oversight of large-scale philanthropic organizations, criminal penalties for CEO retaliation, and immediate investigative access to whistleblower claims, without requiring exposure of identity. It was the most sweeping labor protection reform in over 30 years, and it bore her name. Nia didn't return to the Whitmore mansion. She didn't even drive near it. She moved into a modest apartment on the south side, away from the media frenzy, near a park where she and Reggie used to walk on Saturdays. The walls were thin, but the windows faced the sun. She found herself sorting through boxes of letters late at night. Thousands of them. Some handwritten, some typed. All from women, mostly black, many older, who had scrubbed floors, raised other people's children, and swallowed their dignity for decades. You gave me the words I never knew how to say. I watched the hearings in my apron. I cried through the whole thing. You're the first person who ever made me feel seen. They came from Mississippi, New York, Oakland, Detroit, some with no return address, just love. But even in victory, Nia knew better than to believe the war was over. The folder the stranger had given her still sat open on her table, because buried deep inside the notes Reggie left behind was a name Nia had hoped to never see again. Judge Ronald Ambrose. The same judge who had nearly buried her defamation case months ago. The one who had almost ruled in favor of Bradley before the countersuit was allowed. Reggie had flagged him in his notes years ago, linking him to a mysterious real estate development tied to one of Whitmore's subsidiaries. Ambrose's name appeared on the board of trustees of the Whitmore Urban Innovation Fund, a shadow foundation used to launder contributions through dummy programs and failed infrastructure projects. It had been overlooked, but not anymore. The implications were staggering. If a federal judge had ties to the very corporation under investigation, then how many other cases had he compromised? How many whistleblowers had been legally strangled by rulings dressed up as judicial discretion? Nia stared at the folder like it was radioactive, and then her phone buzzed. It was a journalist from The Intercept, one of the few who'd refused to be silenced during the early days of the investigation.
Ms. Carter, the voice said. We've uncovered something.
Nia's pulse quickened. What? The voice was quiet, firm. Judge Ambrose didn't just delay your case. A pause. He was one of the first investors in Lucent Risk Solutions. Nia hangs up the call and turns to find her door already slightly ajar. On her kitchen table sits a printed court summons. She's being called back to court, but this time, Ambrose is presiding again. The summons sat on Nia's kitchen table, like a threat dressed in formality. The envelope, standard manila, with no return address, had been slipped under her door sometime during the night. But it wasn't the court date that chilled her. It was the judge listed on the front page, presiding on Ronald Ambrose. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the name like it was inked in fire. This wasn't coincidence. It was retaliation masked as protocol. Ambrose, the same judge tied to Whitmore's shell investments, the one who had almost silenced her in court before. Now he was back, again to preside over her retrial. The irony was sickening, but something else happened just as quickly. Nia didn't flinch. She grabbed her phone, called Tasha Lomax, and said only 5 words. It's time to bring him down. Tasha didn't waste a minute. She filed a judicial bias motion, backed by newly uncovered evidence, financial disclosures, campaign donations, traced back to Lucent affiliates, a shell corporation linking Ambrose to Bradley's private board from years before. Whispers turned into proof. Patterns became damning. Within 48 hours, a judicial ethics review board froze Ambrose's authority, pending investigation. By the end of the week, he was officially removed from the case. The retrial was reset, with a new judge, Judge Noreen Diallo, a Haitian-American federal appointee with a reputation for bulldozing judicial politics in favor of transparency. She accepted the case with little ceremony, and one caveat: I will not entertain theater. Bring facts, bring courage. Tasha and her team of lawyers, civil rights champions, tax code specialists, and constitutional watchdogs gathered around Nia like a fortress. They wore sharp suits and sharper minds, and for the first time in months, Nia felt something unfamiliar but welcome in her chest: security. The courtroom filled daily with reporters, activists, students, and curious citizens. Every day felt like a reckoning wrapped in routine. Every statement was weighed against truth and historical injustice. Bradley arrived flanked by fewer attorneys this time. His entourage had thinned, his jaw tighter, his eyes darting more often toward the gallery. The empire was crumbling, and he knew it. Testimony unfolded like a scalpel through silk. Jordan Lee testified about the internal audits he falsified. Luis recounted years of quiet abuse and silent cover-ups. Simone Grant detailed the interference in the crash investigation, calling it the most deliberate obstruction of justice I've seen in my 30 years on the force. Then came Elias Monroe. He stood in open court, voice clear, eyes heavy, and admitted what no one else would have dared. I was hired to intimidate Reggie Carter. I tampered with his car's brakes under directive. I did it, and I've lived with that every day since. Bradley's attorney objected. The judge overruled it. The court sat in stunned silence. Victoria didn't testify, but she watched from the last row. Every day, sunglasses on, hair pulled back, a new face with an old truth beneath it. Camilla testified briefly, confirming years of racial bias in the home. Her voice was soft but unwavering. When asked why she chose to testify against her father, she answered plainly, "Because I finally realized loving someone doesn't mean enabling them." When Nia took the stand, the courtroom leaned forward. She didn't perform. She spoke. About every step she had taken to get there. About Reggie. About her journal. About the choice to tell the truth even when the world demanded her silence. "I never wanted revenge," she said. "I wanted recognition. For my labor. For my husband's life. For every woman who scrubs the corners of this country without ever being seen." The words landed like thunder wrapped in grace. It took the jury less than 4 hours to deliberate. They returned with a unanimous verdict. Nia Carter had been wrongfully targeted, retaliated against, and defamed by Bradley Whitmore. She was awarded $7.8 million in damages. And per court order, Whitmore Global was instructed to issue a formal public apology to Nia Carter on their website, across all media platforms, and at the next board shareholder meeting. But the money didn't move Nia. It was the words she waited for. And when they came, scripted, legal, begrudging, she didn't smile. She nodded, then walked out without looking back. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers. Signs waved. Tears flowed. The moment had become more than a victory. It was a transformation. A full circle. Camilla ran to Nia and hugged her tight. Luis wept openly. Tasha lifted her fist and whispered, "You did it." But Nia's eyes searched for someone else. And there she was, Victoria Whitmore, standing a few feet back, alone. Later that evening, Nia returned to her apartment and found an envelope slipped under her door. Again, inside was a note. "Please. Just one conversation. V." Nia didn't hesitate. She met Victoria at a small cafe on Crenshaw, far from marble staircases and media attention. They sat outside. No bodyguards. No cameras. Just two women who had once lived in the same house, but different worlds. "I'm not here to apologize," Victoria said. "You don't need my guilt." "Then why are you here?" Victoria looked down at her cup. "Because I was there." Nia's face hardened. "Where?" "Not at the crash. But before." Victoria's fingers curled around her coffee. "I knew Reggie was investigating Bradley. I read one of his articles. I told Bradley. I didn't know it would lead to." Nia stood, her chair screeching slightly. "You told him Reggie was looking," she whispered. "You painted the target. I was protecting my family." Nia shook her head. "You were protecting your power." Victoria's voice cracked. "I didn't want him to die. But you didn't want him to win either." The silence between them pulsed. Victoria reached into her bag and handed Nia a sealed envelope. "Reggie gave this to me, years ago. Said if anything happened, and if I was ever brave enough, I should give it to you." Nia hesitated, took it, opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Reggie's handwriting. "If this reaches you, Nia, it means I didn't finish what I started, but I never doubted for a second you would." Her hands trembled. Victoria reached across the table, her voice suddenly serious. "There's something else. Something Reggie never found. A name tied to all of it. A man even Bradley feared. Nia narrowed her eyes. Victoria whispered it. Barely audible. Senator Ellis Granger. Victoria's whisper hung in the air like a blade caught mid-swing. Senator Ellis Granger. The name wasn't unfamiliar, but Nia had never tied it to Reggie's death. Granger was a towering political figure. A polished face on Sunday morning news shows. A centrist darling hailed for bridge building across the aisle. He had attended Whitmore's galas, posed with Victoria at donor luncheons, claimed to support justice reform while pushing legislation that quietly gutted whistleblower protections. Nia stared across the cafe table, stunned. "You're telling me Granger was involved?" Victoria's face twitched. Not directly, but Reggie was close. Too close. He had started tracking the links between Whitmore's nonprofit shell companies and Granger's campaign finance network. That's why Bradley panicked. It wasn't just about the money, it was who that money protected. "And you knew?" "I suspected." Her voice broke. "But I didn't ask. I didn't want to know because knowing meant I couldn't pretend anymore. And I was too deep in it. In the wealth, the quiet, the safety." Nia pushed her chair back, jaw clenched. "You let my husband die." Victoria didn't deny it. She nodded once, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I did. By doing nothing, I helped everything happen." The silence that followed was heavier than any courtroom testimony. Nia stood up and walked to the edge of the sidewalk, staring into traffic. The city hummed around her, indifferent, eternal. Her hands gripped the letter Reggie had left, the one Victoria had held on to all these years. It felt like both a betrayal and a lifeline. Behind her, Victoria's voice trembled. "I know I don't deserve redemption, but I want to do something that matters." Nia turned slowly. "Why now?" "Because my daughter believes in you more than she ever believed in me. And because for the first time in my life, I want to stop watching power and start challenging it." She pulled out a folder and laid it on the cafe table. "I want to help fund your foundation." Quietly. With no strings, no names, just impact. Nia hesitated. This was the same woman who had once scolded her for using the front staircase. And yet, something in Victoria's face had shifted. The gloss was gone. Only the bones of regret remained. A month later, they stood on the same stage side by side for a nationally televised forum on justice and wealth in modern America. The event had been organized by grassroots leaders and amplified by networks desperate for redemption narratives. The pairing stunned audiences, but the dynamic wasn't softened. Victoria began by acknowledging her complicity. "I was insulated by comfort, protected by silence, and trained to see my life as normal, while others were crushed to make it possible." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She owned it. "And Nia," she followed with steel in her voice, "redemption isn't about who can write checks or say sorry. It's about tearing down systems that taught you to be quiet in the first place. It's about action. Relentless, honest, dangerous action." The crowd roared. Hashtags surged again. "Justice is a name. Nia built this." Carter Act Phase 2. Within the year, Nia's foundation, the Carter Collective, was launched with funding from over 20 donors, Victoria's being the first anonymous one. Its mission was radical in its simplicity. Empower domestic workers, elevate Black voices in policymaking, and legally defend whistleblowers who risk everything to tell the truth. But the opening was more than symbolic. Nia personally oversaw the construction of the first community center, a converted brick schoolhouse in South Los Angeles. On the opening day, she walked through the hallway walls, now lined with murals of unsung heroes. Reggie's portrait hung near the front, bold, proud, painted by a local youth artist. The ribbon cutting drew a massive crowd. Tasha spoke. Louise cried. Camilla live-streamed the whole event with a caption that read, "This is what healing built." Nia stood in the center of it all, not smiling for cameras, but watching, absorbing. She was finally at peace. Almost. After the ceremony, Nia stepped into the foyer alone, needing a breath. That's when she saw her. A teenage girl, maybe 16, standing by the bulletin board, eyes scanning the flyers for volunteer work. Her curls were thick and unruly, her skin deep brown and golden under the light. Her cheekbone. Nia's breath caught. She moved closer. Slowly. The girl turned, and for a flash, Nia felt the world tilt. The nose, the jaw, the eyes. They weren't just familiar. They were Reggie's. "Can I help you with something?" Nia asked, her voice catching. The girl smiled softly. "I think I already found what I came for." Nia studied her. What's your name? Aaliyah, the girl said. Aaliyah Carter. The world stopped. Nia blinked. I'm sorry, what? Aaliyah fidgeted with her sleeve. I think I might be your niece. My mom didn't talk about Reggie much. But when I saw this center on the news, something told me I had to come. Nia staggered back a step, heart pounding. She reached for the nearest bench, suddenly lightheaded. My brother had a daughter. Aaliyah nodded. She said Reggie knew. But then, everything happened. The center buzzed behind them. Kids running, mentors shouting directions. But Nia heard none of it. Just the echo of Reggie's voice in her memory. One day, you'll build something that outlives the lies they tried to bury us in. As Nia embraces Aaliyah, tears streaking her cheeks, her phone buzzes. It's Ava, her voice urgent. Nia, we found something in Granger's old campaign logs. A private flight manifest from the night Reggie died, and Senator Granger was on it. Aaliyah Carter stood in the hallway like a ghost who had finally found her body. She didn't cry. She didn't rush. She simply existed, tall, soft-spoken, and steady in a way that reminded Nia of Reggie before the world tried to crack him open. Nia didn't ask for DNA, didn't need documents. Her bones already knew. This girl was his. Reggie's blood, Reggie's features, Reggie's spirit tucked behind a hesitant smile. And just like that, Nia's breath hitched because the last ember she thought had burned out long ago had just flickered back to life. They sat together in the courtyard behind the center, legs folded on a painted bench beneath a mural of Toni Morrison and James Baldwin. The garden bloomed quietly around them, an unlikely sanctuary born from pain and planted in intention. I didn't know where else to go, Aaliyah admitted. I never really belonged anywhere. My mom, she was scared. Said Reggie's world was dangerous, that he died chasing something that wasn't worth it. Nia listened, nodding slowly. It was worth it. Aaliyah's eyes lifted, cautious. Even after everything. Especially after everything. Nia reached for her hand, not to claim her but to steady her. You're not lost, Aaliyah. You're just beginning. Word of Aaliyah's return spread gently through the center. Camilla took her under her wing, and before long the two were inseparable, launching youth workshops, designing curriculum for advocacy programs, and mentoring middle schoolers who'd never seen black girls command space with such quiet thunder. Camilla, now a college sophomore majoring in urban policy, had turned her own pain into purpose. She interned at the center full-time, managing communications and facilitating town hall discussions for the Carter Collective's outreach division. My father taught me to hide, she once said during a panel, but Nia taught me to lead. Their programs began attracting national attention. Local news evolved into national features. Documentarians requested interviews. Major foundations offered funding with few strings attached. But Nia remained unmoved by fame. She walked the same hallways every day, meeting new volunteers, cleaning out storage rooms with Luis, reading every email herself before responding in longhand on stationery paper. She wore no title on her door. Her only plaque was nailed quietly to the center's front lobby, for those who were never meant to be remembered, but made history anyway. The mural had been completed that spring. It spanned 2 walls and wrapped the outer edge of the center's east side, vivid, layered, and defiant. Painted by a 19-year-old artist from Watts, who had once been expelled for graffiti violations, it was a masterpiece of realism and rebellion. Reggie stood in profile, eyes lifted to an invisible horizon, papers in one hand, and a bullhorn in the other. Nia stood beside him, not behind him, but with him. Her eyes softer, but her posture strong. The background pulsed with the names of whistleblowers, labor leaders, and domestic workers in translucent paint. People came from all over the country just to take pictures beneath it. But Nia never lingered there. She passed it in the mornings on her way inside, coffee in hand, notes tucked under her arm, and when she looked up briefly, silently, she would whisper the same line to herself. He built the fire. I kept it burning. She spoke it again the day they held the center's first graduation ceremony for their youth civic leadership cohort, a class of 42 students ages 14 to 19, all of them black or brown, many of them first-generation Americans, all of them unapologetically loud in their mission to rewrite the world. Aaliyah gave the keynote, her voice no longer unsure. I didn't grow up knowing Reggie Carter, she said, glancing briefly at Nia in the front row. But I stand here today because of him. And because of the woman who refused to let the truth stay buried. Nia didn't cry, but her hands tightened into fists. Not from anger, from pride. The summer came like gold on concrete, and with it, the weight of history began to lift. Slowly, unevenly, but visibly, court reforms trickled down. Another judge tied to corporate laundering was indicted. The Carter Act expanded, the language of activism shifted, with domestic workers finally gaining a platform they'd never been allowed to occupy. At the center, more classrooms were added. A podcast studio was installed for young journalists. A mental health wing opened, named in Reggie's honor. Everything was growing, and still Nia remained rooted. She refused interviews on primetime television, declined book deal, rejected Person of the Year nominations. "I'm not here to become a statue," she said once. "I'm here to break the ones that lied to us." One Thursday evening, as the sun dipped low and the courtyard bathed in fire-orange light, Nia sat on a bench beside Aaliyah and Camilla, flipping through letters from former students. Some were now teachers, some policy. One had just passed the bar exam and cited Nia in her application essay. That's when Ava walked up, phone in hand, eyes wide. "You need to see this," she said. Nia blinked. "What now?" Ava turned the screen around. An email, from an official address. A verified sender. Subject: formal invitation to discuss candidacy for California State Senate, District. Nia read the words 3 times before responding. "Is this a prank?" Ava laughed. "It's real. A local organizer backed by several former legislators just submitted your name. They want you to consider it." Nia leaned back, silent. The center buzzed around them. Kids laughing. A staff member yelling about spilled paint. Music from a nearby dance class seeping into the courtyard. For a moment it felt too sacred to leave. But she also remembered what Reggie once said, on a quiet night, after another unjust verdict. "You can shake systems with protests, but you rewrite them with power." She looked at the screen again. At Aaliyah. At Camilla. At the mural beyond the glass. And she smiled just barely. "I never wanted to be a politician." Ava raised an eyebrow. "That's exactly why they want you." Nia turned to the girls and asked, "What do you think?" Camilla grinned. "I think Reggie would have run." Aaliyah nodded. "And I think he'd want you to win." Nia stood, the evening sun outlining her silhouette like a flame. She didn't answer. Not yet. But in the morning, the Carter Collective would release a press statement. It would read, "Nia Carter is officially exploring a run for state senate. Her campaign will be powered by the people, especially the ones never invited to the table. If you've ever been silenced for telling the truth, if you've ever watched power crush someone who only wanted fairness, then you know Nia's story isn't just hers. It's ours. Justice doesn't come easy, but it starts with being seen. Type yes if you believe silence should never protect injustice."